Alright, so welcome to our 8th video, I believe, in this series looking at creating a prototype for a digital solution that encompasses interface, algorithms, and databasing. So previously we've looked at setting up our database using Python. We created a SQLite 3 database, which there is a package for us in Python which does a lot of the heavy lifting. And we created a method to create a connection to any given database file name, so that when we run our application, it will either link to a file that already exists within our project library, or no, sorry, our project folder. That's the correct word I was looking for. Or if it doesn't, it actually creates it for us. So super easy once we get into wanting to create multiple databases. We've got that there. We just add in the file name and it will build the database for us. So what we're going to look at today, or in this activity, this video, is setting up a couple of the other methods around creating tables and inserting values into those tables. There is an argument that, you know, if this is your first project, you could do it manually. So SQLite you can access through applications like DB Browser, for example. And we will look at DB Browser when we're actually searching our database and seeing that, you know, the things we've added have been created in there. Actually, we can have a little bit of a look at it now. If I open up the users.db file, by default, I have it set up in DB Browser. Error, nothing too major. So you can see my users DB file currently doesn't have any tables. You know, there's no data in it or anything. And you can see there's spaces where you can actually execute all the SQL in here, or you can even manually add in new records, you know, create tables, that sort of thing. But again, when we get into systems where we've got lots of tables and lots of data entries to add in, being able to access SQL makes it a bit easier because we can copy and paste and just change the pieces. But then when we fold in the Python level on top, we can just, you know, get it to a stage where we press a button and it builds the whole database, all the tables, all the data for us. Probably won't get to that point by the end of this video because we're only going to create one table with, you know, maybe a couple bits of data in it just to test it all out. But then in a future video, we definitely will look at that process of automating for multiple tables, multiple values, that sort of thing. All right, so I'll just move that out of the way and we'll make a start. So we're in our database Python library because these files are going to be for the building and interaction with the database. So we'll create the two methods. The first one being create table. And this is obviously putting a table within our database. So we need to pass in our database connection, so connect to the database so we can update it. And also we need to know the SQL that we want. I'm just going to pass for the time being while we set up the other method, which is inserting the values. So with that, we want our connection, our SQL, and also the values we want to insert. And pass. So both of these are quite similar in nature, which is why we're going to look at them at the same time, and then we're going to apply them within our main Python file. So with create table, what we want to do first is create what we call a cursor. And so a cursor is basically like positioning it within DB Browser. I guess it's the equivalent of clicking in here, execute SQL, and clicking here, right, to say this is the point we want you to go to in the database, ready to add in some SQL. Press enter there. So we're creating our cursor. That's got parentheses because it is a method. And then with that cursor, we're going to execute our SQL statement. And once again, I have forgotten the exception. So we're going to try to do this. And if for whatever reason there's an error, so the exception to that is we're going to print the error. So you could write it the same as up here, just to, I guess, kind of show that it works both ways without the as e. I'll do it this way on this occasion. And so that's creating a table. Inserting our values is the same sort of thing. So we're going to try. We create a cursor. We're going to execute our SQL. But the slight variation this time is we do want to pass in the values as well. So what values we're actually inserting using that SQL statement. And then one more step we're going to add is connection.commit, which is basically saying write the changes to the data that's being added. And we'll also add in a return. So this will return the last row ID of our cursor. So essentially this will just tell us how many rows of data have been added, and will sort of act as a confirmation that it's been successful. Except we'll print the error. Alright, so now that we've set those up, it's just a case of actually running these methods with our SQL. So in order to do that, let's create another method. So I'm going to call it initial DB. Need the connection. I'm pretty sure that's all we need. It's basically this method is just going to be run after we connect in the application, and it's just going to do any sort of initial methods that we need to run, which when we're first creating our database is to add the tables and insert the values. And so this is probably something we'll only run once, and then we'll comment it out, just because you'll see why. If we run it a couple of times, we might actually have a look at the issues. So in saying that, the first thing we want to do is establish our SQL. So I'm going to create two variables called table SQL, and we'll call it data SQL. I'll do that. I'll just do it one at a time. So with the table SQL, we're going to assign it, and we're going to take advantage of the triple quotation marks. The triple quotation marks basically allows for a multi-line string. So we can have a string that goes over more than one line without the Python program having a meltdown going, there's no quotation mark at the end of this string, because it knows, oh, it's just going to, there's enters, we can ignore that. But the reason why we want to use a multi-line string is it's just nicer to set up our SQL that way, because that's how it's generally structured, is each keyword on a line, and then, you know, it's easier to read as a developer. So the table SQL we're going to write, we use the keyword create table, and we're going to add in the phrase if not exist. So with the tables, we can actually run this multiple times without it being affected, because if it doesn't exist, it will create the table, similar to how in the previous video we created the connection, and because the database didn't exist, it created the database for us. We don't have to say create database if not exists. That's not part of it. But this will actually create the table for us the first time, and then after that, it won't bother because it already exists as it is. And our table is just going to be called, actually call it logins because we call it the database file users. That's a little bit confusing. So we'll call it logins. Then in a set of parentheses, we add in our fields. So we're only going to have two fields, username, which is a text, and it's also our primary key. I know some people prefer to initialize a primary key after the fields. It's really up to you. Password, text, and we'll say not null. Just we have to have a username and a password when we add in values into this table in our database. All right, so that's all it is. So we're going to create single table logins with username and password. Obviously, if you want to create more than one table, you would have to create separate variables or a list of variables and run through that process. But like I said, in a future project, we'll look at a process of automating that. So you can, for a single bit of text, you can separate and run the separate SQL statements. The other one we want to create is data SQL. So equals, again, triple quotes. And the SQL for that is insert into our table name, which is logins. And then we want to define what field we're interacting with, so username and password. Values. And then because we don't know what the values are yet, we're just going to say question mark, question mark. All right, so if we go back up to our insert values, so remember values is a separate parameter. We will define that very shortly. Right, so this is the SQL part, and the values will be separate. So we can actually probably do that now. So initial value equals, and then what we're going to do is use a tuple, which is a what we call an immutable list. So we can't really do anything with this list other than look at it. And we're going to use John as the username and the password as ABC. So basically, these values will be added in where the question marks are. So when we run this, it'll insert into our logins, username and password. Alright, so now that we've got all of our initial SQL, our initial values set up, it's simply just a case of running our functions. So create table. So with our connection, whatever that may be, and our table SQL. Once we've done that, we want to insert our values with our connection, data SQL statement, and the initial value. All right, so we'll save that. All right, so this is going to be our initial database file. What I'm going to do though, is I'm just going to comment out the insert value. So we just want to make sure the table bit works first. I've obviously done all this at the same time, but when we're testing, we should, gradually step it out. But just wanted to get in all of the coding into our database Python library. So we've created our table, inserted values, and then this is just that initializing method. So back in our main section, so once we've created our connection, we can say DB, initial DB, and I think we need to pass in the connection. So that's right, yeah, so we need the connection. So there was one little error I made before. I forgot to return the connection. So, well, I had returned the connection, but I hadn't, stored it as a variable. So once we create the connection, we now got a connection. We can use that. We can also use that in these other screens as well, which we will look at in our next video once we've got this up and running. So save, Control S is our friend. And now we're back in the main section. Let's give it a run and see what happens. So we didn't get an error, which is nice. You can see the interface has popped up. But the real test is if we go in and look at our SQL database structure. So it doesn't look like it's appeared there. Do I have to refresh? So I'll just close it and reopen it. Yeah, so when you look at the users DB, you see it has 12 kilobytes, which is usually a sign that something's been added. I just had to refresh it all. So now you see when we go in our database structure, we now have one table called logins. If we browse the data, there's nothing in there yet because we did comment out our insert data action, but we do have our logins table there. And you'll notice as well that the user database didn't create a copy of it because it was already created. So it was smart enough to go, oh, it's already there. Let's just open that and work within that connection. But we'll just run it again just to show you that it still works every time you create the table. So again, you can probably see the little icon down here to suggest it is working. I'll just close it. And if I go back and reopen the user's database, it hasn't again created a copy of the logins table. It's just that one. All right, so now we've got that working and we're happy with all that, we can go back to our database file, comment out or uncomment our insert values, save it so that it will actually run. When we run it this time, again, we want to see no errors, which we, again, successfully, the interface has come up, the little icon down there gives it away. Just working on my second screen, it always pops up on my main screen. And if we look at the user's database file, you can see again one table, but when we look in the browse data, we've now got John as a username and password of ABC. So close database, and that's what I was supposed to do before. So yeah, that's how we refresh. That's not that one, that's in the top folder. Yeah, so it uses DB file, there it is. All right. So just to show you what I was referring to about, wanting to only run that once, that initial database. So when we run it, again, you'll see it spits us an error. So class SQLite 3 error. And essentially what that error is referring to is when we go to insert our value again, because it tries to insert John and ABC again, and particularly because we set the username as a primary key, it created an error. If we were to actually get rid of this, and we'll save it, I'll run it again. You'll see that I've got to close the previous instance. That's my bad. So we run it again. Still giving us an error. Interesting. Must be smart enough to know it's the same thing. Yeah, so maybe it outsmarted me. I thought I outsmarted it. So essentially, it sees that the value is already in there and it doesn't want to do it again. So it creates an error and our connection drops out. All right. So we'll just fix that up back with the primary key. Right, but now that we've got our database connected and initialized, we'll actually get rid of that. No, actually, we'll leave that. What we'll do is we'll get rid of the insert values. Because essentially the purpose of us having the insert values method isn't necessarily that initial, creation of values. Essentially, the adding users to the logins table will occur when a user registers an account. So that's when we'll run that insert values, that particular SQL statement. And the value will obviously come from the register form, which again we might look at in a future video. But yeah, we can leave that running because, as we said, it's not going to create the table again. It's just going to leave it all as is because it already exists. Yeah, so you can take it either way. Maybe leaving the initialized database file is the better method. And as I said, you know, the insert value, we can take all that and use it later on within our system. All right, so now that we've got our database populated with tables and data values, in the next video, we'll look at how to actually access that data within our Python file. The final step to having a application which connects interface, algorithms, and obviously our data. So thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next one.